But let's come to sort of the exciting stuff. Yeah. You've seen this pyramid. Okay, I don't know why it's a pyramid, it just looked pretty when I drew it. But basically the idea is that you have inputs that contribute to activities, that contribute to outputs and outcomes and impacts. Now the important thing is on this side. Your managers and minister are responsible for thinking about impacts and outcomes. Okay? That's the senior management role and the politician's role. They need to say, what are we seeking to achieve through the education system? And once they've set those impacts and outcomes, it's then over to you guys to say, okay, how are we going to do it? And so you have this, you manage towards achieving these results, and you plan, budget, and monitor the achievement of the inputs, the outputs, the activities, and the inputs. Now, many people think that you only focus on outputs or outcomes. That's a misunderstanding. An input measure can be equally useful as a proxy for quality of education. Can you think of one? It's been in the news. An input is a textbook. If you don't have textbooks delivered, it's a problem. Okay, so monitoring inputs can be exceptionally important. Pupil-teacher ratios, what do they call it nowadays? Educator-learner ratios. We've got to change our terminology. Okay? That's an input. That's an input. What did the state president say? Teachers have got to be, or educators have got to be, in the classroom on time teaching. Okay? What is that? That's an activity. Okay? We should be able to monitor that. We're not, in most schools we're not. Okay? And so there's certain aspects of this diagram where we've tended to put the emphasis, particularly in this area, over the last 5, maybe 8 years. And what I'm saying is we mustn't forget about these things as well, because they can be equally important in identifying where problems are and how to correct issues within the process. Okay. What is a good indicator? There are a couple of words up there. Different consultants will give you a different list of words. I've now reduced all those words down to one. Or maybe 3. Usefulness. Okay? Is it useful? And the Auditor General can go jump. If that measure is useful from a management perspective to monitor and measure, then you measure it. If it's not useful, forget about it. Because the purpose, as we saw, the purpose of performance monitoring is to be able to reward success, distinguish success from failure, able to learn from our mistakes, able to learn from our successes. And if a measure is enabling you to do those things, then it is useful. If it's not, then it's not helping the process move forward. Okay, now it will be useful if it's reliable, if it's well defined, if it's cost-effective, verifiable, and so on. Those are secondary indicators of a good indicator, if I can put it that way. But you must look at every single indicator that you have and ask yourself the very basic question: that we don't teach our children, which is, so what? So what if I know this information? How is it going to change what I do? Okay? And if you can answer that in the affirmative, then you know that you've got a good indicator. If it's going to give you useful feedback from the system that says, no, we're making progress, or no, we're not making progress, or there are problems, then it is going to be meaningful to monitor that particular issue.
So on your comment regarding the auditor jump, and then they are saying, we gave you money. We want to see in a measure that shows how the money is being spent. And then I said, no, for me it's not useful. What is useful is I want to see, the impact that I'm doing, maybe on the community or on my clients who are the learners.
Yeah.
And then they said, no, we want to see how the money has been spent, how the money has been used.
Well, what they're looking for is there are two measures that are in question there. They're looking for an output measure. You're talking about an impact measure. Okay? Just from our discussion. And both of those are potentially useful. Now the question is, who is managing the function? The Auditor General or the manager? Okay, and I think this is where departments and the managements of the departments need to start pushing back a bit and saying, listen, if you're the experts in education, monitoring, performance management, etc., please apply for a job. We have vacancies within the department. Okay? Otherwise, your role as the auditor is not to tell us which measures we are allowed to use, but to verify whether the information underpinning those measures is correct. Okay, do you hear what I'm saying? So they have a particular role, and it's a very, very important role. We need to know that the information that you're using to test impact is statistically correct. That is the role of the Auditor General, to check whether it is statistically correct. That it is reliable, verifiable, and well-defined. That's sort of where their mandate ends. Your mandate as a manager within the function is to say whether it is useful or not. And this is an ongoing fight we have with the Auditor General as to whether they can encroach on the terrain of managers and say, no, we don't think this is a useful measure. And every time I have that, I sort of say, oh, so when did you take an education degree? Okay. Right. And then you get different kinds of performance indicators. And this is sort of a bit of theory, but it's useful to know that these exist. And it's important to be aware of these different kinds of indicators so that we aren't just focused on cost and quantity. Many people only know how to count and how to measure the amount of money. And there are a whole range of other indicators that are available to you. If we just go down this list, quantity, that's covered. We can count the number of children at school. Quality, how do you measure quality of education? It's tough, okay? But is it important? Yes, it's very important. Cost and price, that's fine. Timeliness. Textbooks delivered late are not useful. Timeliness is important. Are we measuring that enough within the education sector? In the health sector, it's critical. An ambulance arrives late. It's the difference between life and death. Okay? In the education sector, you're late for your exam. You're late in marking the exams. Those are timeliness things. And they have important implications. Start and end times, the distribution of the service. Is it fairly distributed? If I had to do a geographical plot of the Dinaledi schools, would it, and then plot poverty on the same map, would we get a sense that the distribution of those schools is fair? Okay? That there's a fair distribution in the assistance, the special assistance that the department is giving to communities. Adequacy, that's an interesting one. Grade R, is the funding adequate? Okay? Is the level of service adequate? Because it ends at 12:30, whereas children actually need to be cared for until 5 o'clock. There's no after-school care provided in the design of the program. And so it is not actually addressing a community need. Are you with me on that one?
Yeah.
Accessibility. Again, we go to Limpopo, there's that wonderful school, the pictures were beautiful, of children learning under trees. Not because they had to, but because they chose to, because the school was inaccessible. Are you aware of the case?
Yeah.
Okay. And the problem was not... Yeah, I sort of had to do some reading up on the education. I take an interest in the department. It wasn't the school transport was provided, but there wasn't a road right up to the school, and so the children still had to walk. I think it was 3 kilometers to the school. And there was an incident of rape of one of the school children. And so the community just said, listen, we want a school in our community where we can monitor the accessibility of the children to the school. And this is going to be a big issue with the closing down of farm schools. Okay? How far are children going to have to travel in order to get to school once we close the multi-classroom schools down? Have we got the systems in place in order to overcome the distance and the accessibility? Then you also have accessibility from inclusive education. Children with disabilities accessing the system. Are we providing sufficient opportunities in that regard? Okay, so those are what we call direct indicators. The data gathered mainly by management information systems. Then we have a set of relationship indicators, and these are what people talk about 3 E's. I like to talk about the 4 E's because it's economy, efficiency, effectiveness, and then most importantly in our own country, equity. Is our education system equitable? And the answer is immediately no. You attend some schools, you're okay. You attend other schools, your chances are rather slim. And that is an immediate indication of the continuing inequity in our system. And so the question is, A, are we measuring equity? And B, what are we doing about it? And we need to continually asking ourselves, is this going to be useful information? And sometimes we don't measure information because it will embarrass us. You know, I haven't seen a recent breakdown of the matric results by former Model C schools versus Bantu education schools. Why don't we have that breakdown? Because if we had it, we would be severely embarrassed. Because it would show that over the last 18 years, not much has changed in terms of equity. It's a challenge. It's a challenge. And we have to face up to these challenges. that as soon as you start measuring something, it can show your good points, but it can also show your weaknesses. And that's important because then we need to take steps to try and change that. Has the post-provisioning policy changed sufficiently in order to change that reality? Or do the good teachers still go to the good schools? And the bad teachers are pushed into the bad schools. How do we change that? I don't know. Yeah.
I've listened to what you said concerning that. When you speak of equity concerning matric results with your X-Model T and your XDT, HOR,
Yeah.
HOD schools. But is not also your attitude of your educators, qualification of your educators?
But that's exactly what I'm saying, is that have we concentrated our good educators in the good schools? And look, I'm on a school governing body, okay, at a local school. Who do we interview? We interview the good teachers, okay? Who do we select? The best we can find. Okay. Now, the question is, how do we begin to change this? So that we can, A, encourage the good teachers to move into the rural schools. We tried paying them more. Did that work? Not really. Everybody in Limpopo got a pay increase because they were all brilliant teachers. Okay. Okay. You've all heard of SMART. Sometimes I think the people that measure SMART are particularly dwarf, but that's because they become fixated. Is it specific? Is it measurable? Is it achievable? Is it? Okay. As opposed to asking, is it? Useful. And this is, we need to move away from getting, tied up with these definitions. We need to focus on, is it useful? It's a bonus if it is also smart. And if you read the framework, and you can use this and point it out to the Auditor General next time he says it must be smart. Ask him where the word must appears in the framework. Okay, I was very careful to write a sentence that says performance targets should ideally be smart. Now, if you analyze that sentence very clearly, does it impose an imperative on the producer of performance targets? Okay, you're all educators, you know what an imperative is. Is there an obligation that it must be smart? No. No. If you can make it smart, that's a bonus. If it's not smart, well, get lost. The issue, is it useful, is the most important thing. Okay, I'm not going to go through this particular one because after the break I'm going to take you through a really practical example of where I've developed performance indicators for grade R, CAPS and post-provisioning. I did something else, can't remember it right at the moment. Okay, sort of a theoretical background to program performance monitoring and evaluation. Okay, so we've spoken about inputs, outputs, activities, outcomes, impacts, those kinds of things, and some of the issues related to developing performance measures. What I'd like to do now is to take you through a process of thinking. Okay, and we call these the logic models, or the logic, what do you call them? Log frames is another name for them. And basically, it is taking a bottom-up planning approach. You want to do this, how do you do it? Okay. Some people use them in a top-down approach. In other words, you want to achieve that, what are the activities that you need to do it? It doesn't really matter. as a colleague of mine said, you sometimes need to change the logical model to make it more logical. Okay? And that's an important principle, and this goes for so much, you know. Only in maths do you get 1 + 1 = 2. I recently saw 2 + 2 = 5, and then underneath it said, who cares? Okay. So, when you come to management frameworks, performance management frameworks, you need to make the system work for you in a positive way, okay? Not in a way that undermines the objectives of the system. And so what we're doing here, I'm going to be stuck sort of here, not moving around too much. What we did here is that we looked at a range of programs, grade R, CAPS, post-provisioning, and ANA. You can choose which one you want to look at. We'll look at grade R. Good, thank you. And what we said is, okay, we have the grade R program. And the first question we asked was, who is involved in delivering this program? Okay, so we looked at roles and responsibilities. And we started at a very broad level. We said, fairly obviously, National Education Department has a role to play. And if you go along a bit, you have the provincial head office has a role to play. And if you go along a bit, you see I like these fancy Excel things, you've got the district office, and then finally the school. Okay, so those are the people or the institutions that are involved in delivering grade R. The next question we asked was, who does what? Okay, and we started with the national office. So what do they do? And we call this the elements of the program. And we said, if you want to implement a grade R policy and you're the national department, what do you need to do to make this happen? And some of them are very obvious. The first thing is policy development. You need a grade R policy before you can implement it. That's a good starting point, agree? Thank you. Okay. You need to do some implementation planning. Once you've got the policy there, you need to say, how are we going to make this hit the ground? Guess what? You need to do some infrastructure planning. Some costing and budgeting of the infrastructure plans. And the other things that you need to do, you need to establish capacity. What is that? Well, if you're going to be implementing grade R, you need at least 4 kinds of capacity. Can you think of them? I'm not going to give you the answer this time. You need teachers that are qualified to teach grade R. That's fairly straightforward, okay? Next 3.
Resources, material.
No, we're talking about capacity, not resources.
Oh, okay.
Capacity is people.
Okay.
People to support the teachers.
People to support the teachers at a district level, okay? That can provide the management framework within which those teachers operate. People who will monitor the implementation at the district office level. And the last one is easy. Capacity at the national office to manage the district, the provincial offices. Okay, so we've got those 4 levels of capacity that need to be put in place.
So I see you've excluded the community-based sites because you have grade R in
No, we do have them if you look at the school things, okay? It's not, this is focusing on the role of national departments, okay? We'll get there. Okay, then you need a communication strategy. Tell people what is happening, when it is happening. Classic example, I'm in a Gauteng school and we're told that grade R is only happening in 2019. So as a governing body member, I'm going, fine, let's forget about that for the next 5 years. And then I come to interview national people for this project and they say, no, we're going for universal access in 2019. We want all schools to have grade R facilities. And I go, well, I'll listen to the education department in Gauteng for the moment. Okay, so there's a breakdown in communication between the people that are driving the policy and the people that are implementing the policy. And we need to sort that out. Okay, your grade R curriculum, that's been part of the CAPS process. Your grade R LTSM, there's some nice norms and standards that apply there, that's great. There are also those packs that are being distributed. There's working with the education institutions, training grade R teachers, getting the, the qualification standards in place, and then your monitoring and evaluation of the system. Now that is just the national department. Can you see how the system works? Start from policy planning, implementation, costing, then do some work, establish capacity, do some communication, and then you end up with monitoring and evaluation at the end. Okay, so similarly, we move on to the provincial office. Does the provincial office need to develop the policy? No, it's there. It's a given. Okay? What do they need to do? They need to establish the capacity to implement the policy. They then need to do implementation, planning and budgeting. Putting aside the money, making sure that they have the systems in place. That's important. This is where we found a big gap in the implementation process, is that the money was allocated, but guess what? Very few of the provinces actually had the systems up and running to be able to disperse the funding to the schools. And so the whole implementation is running about 3 years behind schedule, because the basic management capacity within the departments at the provincial level was not catered and developed. Your infrastructure provision, training of district staff, monitoring and evaluation, and then providing support to the schools. Is this beginning to sound familiar? Okay, let's unpack that. At your district offices, again, first, establish capacity. Training of educators. This is important because we often think that once you train the grade R educator, you're sorted, they've got a grade R educator. But that grade R educator is working within the foundation phase. And if the foundation phase head does not understand grade R, they are then going to have expectations about what a grade R class looks like. That is unrealistic and not aligned to the policy. For instance, I shouldn't mention this, I came across headmasters that said, the grade R classes are awfully noisy. And we said, so? They're supposed to be noisy. It's called an active learning curriculum. Okay, we want the children to be falling off the slides and running around like mad because that is that stage of development. And so if you don't have the understanding in the management of the school, you can end up with a situation with all the grade R children sitting on the floor going A, B, C, D, which is going to teach them nothing. Because through the grade R curriculum, you're preparing the children to learn. You're not teaching them. And that is a fundamental difference. And so your training of educators is not just the training of the grade R educators. It's of the management of the school so that they understand and make the space for grade R within their thinking and within their expectations.